Hey, it's Vanessa Hardy from Long and Foster. I wanted to talk about a problem that really comes up sort of often, unfortunately, in our area. What if you are dealing with an estate that has a person living in the house that's owned by an estate, and the person says they're not leaving? Um, you'd be surprised at how often this happens in our area. I actually had a client who had a tenant who was murdered. And I actually saw it on the news. And the next day, the client called me and said, hey, that was my tenant. And the story just went crazy from there. Um, my client discovered that someone was living in the property that this woman who had just been killed, someone was living in that property. And my client knew that that person was not supposed to be there. Uh, my client called the police. This is very soon after the murder. My client calls the police and says, my tenant was murdered, and there's someone in her home who I know should not be there. Well, the cops went right over there. You can imagine the cops saw this as a top priority. They went right over there, and my client watched as the police put handcuffs on that person. And then there was a lot of back and forth talking between the police and the person in handcuffs, and the police take the handcuffs off of the person, and the person goes right back into that deceased person's property. And what the police told my client is the person says that they are a tenant. The person told the police, I live in this property and I'm a family member of the person who was murdered. And the cop said, okay, this person is saying they're a tenant. The homeowner is saying it's not a tenant and the person has no right to be here. The cop's position was, we cannot resolve a civil possession issue out here on the sidewalk. They told my client, you're going to have to go to court and get a judge to say that that person isn't supposed to be in this property, and then you can get them out. It was a very long process. Now, hopefully, that sort of situation isn't one you're dealing with, but the situation where someone passes away and family members show up expecting to clean out a house, and they find out there's someone living there and that person says that they won't leave, that happens more often than you think. So if you're in that situation, I want to give you a few tips. You definitely are going to have to sit down, I think, and get some advice from a lawyer, but I want to just give you a few things that you can start thinking about as you gear up to really explore your options. Okay, so one of the first things you want to ask is, who represents the estate? So we talked about this in an earlier video. The estate needs to be a legal person. So the person who owned the property and has now passed away, that was a legal person. But now that they've passed away, there needs to be a legal person who can act in that person's place. So the first question, if you show up and you're looking to clean out a house and you find out there's someone living there, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, does the estate have a personal representative? That means someone has taken the will down to the courthouse, gone through all of the steps for the court to officially assign a personal representative, and that's going to be a person who is essentially the hands and feet of the estate out here in the world. That personal representative can open bank accounts for the estate, take in money, distribute money, get a tax ID number. That personal representative can go to court on behalf of the estate. And that may be really important. That may be something you need to do if you've got someone in the property and legally you need to go to court to get them out. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I don't want you to get ahead of yourself. You don't necessarily have to go to court to remove someone, but you're going to need a personal representative to act on behalf of the estate, to if you need to file anything in court on behalf of the estate, you're going to need a personal representative. So that's one thing you want to think about. Has anyone been appointed to actually legally act on the estate's behalf? Very important. Personal representative, that's number one. The next thing you want to ask yourself is, who is that person and why are they there? So this could be a sibling, easily could be a child of the deceased person, could be a sibling of the deceased person, could be a caretaker. It could be a tenant. It could be someone who, I don't know, somehow got into the property and they just set up a home. I mean, obviously, that happens. So you can imagine a scenario where a caretaker has some kind of an agreement with the deceased person that, hey, you can live here, help me take care of the house, help me take care of medical needs, running errands, that sort of thing. So the person isn't technically paying rent, but they've got this agreement with the deceased. Maybe the deceased says, hey, if anything happens to me, you can stay here for another couple years. I mean, there could be legal issues. You can't just assume that you've got the house, the person has died, and that if someone's living there, that they need to get out. You don't want to jump to that conclusion. You definitely have to get some legal advice, some advice from an attorney who's dealt with estate issues and landlord-tenant issues, both of those categories, estate issues and landlord-tenant issues. But you don't want to jump to the conclusion that someone's in here, they're a squatter, that sort of thing. Or they haven't been paying any rent and therefore they're not a tenant, they don't have rights. You can't jump to that conclusion. You do want to ask, who are they and why do they think they have a right to be there? Very important. Okay, so let's imagine a scenario like the one I mentioned with my client, where someone passes away and someone else is somehow able to almost break into the property. They know it's vacant, they break in and they've set up camp. They're living there. I don't want to call them squatters, but let's just say they're not tenants. They don't have anything signed. So, you know, you're showing up at the property to clean it out and you know this person just should not be there. You absolutely do not want to take self-help measures. You absolutely want to talk to an attorney. You want to determine, is there a personal representative? Who is this person and why do they think they have a right to be there? And don't do anything like changing the locks, boarding the place up, turning off the utilities. Don't do anything like that to get the person out. You absolutely want to talk to an attorney because you don't want to wind up in a situation where you're legally in the right and then you show up at court, but you've taken all these self-help measures and the judge doesn't look kindly on that. So you don't want to wind up damaging your case in the long run if indeed you have to have a case. So the last thing I do want to say, of course you want to talk to an attorney, but you're going to have options. Your first option isn't going to be, I've got to go through a lengthy and expensive eviction process. Often your attorney, if you've got someone in the house and you know the person, your attorney may be able to sit down with that person and say, hey, is there a way we can come up with a solution that works for everybody, that doesn't involve a lengthy court battle to get this person out? The other thing is, what you might find out is that there's some value in having that person in the property. I'll tell you what I mean. There are plenty of landlords and investors who will buy a property with a tenant in place who is paying rent. So if you have someone in the house who's willing and able to pay rent, you may be able to sell that property even with that person in the property. So if this is someone that you know and you've got, you can show that the person has been paying rent and they just don't want to leave and you don't want to go through drama trying to actually get them out, your attorney and that person may be able to sit down and come up with something that works for everybody. And it might involve you selling the property with the tenant in place who's paying the rent. And for a lot of landlords who are looking for investment properties with a return, that could be a great setup. As I said, of course, the most important thing is to contact a lawyer, but I just want to give you some tips and some things to think about as you get to the point where you're getting on the phone with a lawyer and sitting down with an attorney. I know that those are some things that the attorney is going to go over with you as well. Is there a personal representative? Do you know this person that's in the property? And what is that person saying is their right to be there? What kind of legal claims might they make? So I am Vanessa Hardy with Long and Foster, and I work with people who are in complicated situations like this one. So please feel free to give me a call. I'd be happy to point you in the right direction as far as landlord, tenant, lawyers, and estate attorneys.